You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Only a biological man and a biological woman, in other words, a husband and a wife, make a family. That was the crux of the centre's response to a clutch of petitions seeking recognition and registration of same-sex marriages under the Hindu Marriage Act, the Special Marriage Act, and the Foreign Marriage Act. On 25th February, as the centre opposed the pleas, it said, and I quote, "Living together as partners and having sexual relations with the same-sex individual is not comparable with the Indian family unit concept of a husband, wife, and children, which necessarily presuppose a biological man as husband, a biological woman as wife, and children born out of the union. And finally, any judicial interference would cause, and I quote, a complete havoc with the delicate balance of personal laws in the country." With the matter now listed for 20th April, let's take a step back to understand who are the petitioners in the case, what are they demanding, what are the arguments made by Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, and why some of these arguments do not hold for the LGBTQI+ community. And to discuss all this, in today's episode, you'll hear from Akshat Agarwal, a research fellow at the Vithi Center for Legal Policy, Anjali Gopalan, human rights activist and the director for the NAS Foundation, and Karan Tripathi, legal consultant for the Quint. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. So who are the petitioners in the case? The first petition is filed by members of the LGBTQ community, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Gopi Shankar, G. Orvasi, and Geeti Thadani, who argue that Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act, HMA, allows for same-sex marriage and that it clearly lays down that marriage can be performed between any two Hindus. The second plea is filed by two women, Kavita Arora and Ankita Khanna, who have been living as a couple for the past 8 years and tried to get married under the Special Marriage Act in September 2020, but the relevant court officer refused to do so. Their petition states that denying the registration of marriage is discriminatory on the grounds of sexual orientation and is not permitted under Article 15 of the Constitution, citing the Supreme Court ruling in 2019, which struck down Section 377 of the IPC. The third petition is filed by two men, Vaibhav Jain and Parag Vijay Mehta, who got married in the USA in 2017 but were denied a marriage certificate under the Foreign Marriage Act when they approached the Indian consulate. They have also raised similar arguments as Kavita Arora and Ankita Khanna regarding discrimination and violations of constitutional protections. Now the centre has argued that in India, a marriage necessarily depends upon, and I quote, age-old customs, rituals, practices, cultural ethos, and societal values, and that under Section 377, the Supreme Court had only decriminalized a particular human behavior, but neither intended to nor did in fact legitimize the human conduct in question. Akshat Agarwal, a research fellow at the Vithi Center for Legal Policy, believes that the centre has a very narrow understanding of what Indian culture is, and irrespective of what is the interpretation, the Indian Constitution provides everyone the right to autonomy and the right to choice.
I think I have two thoughts on that. One is, firstly, I think it's a very narrow understanding of what Indian culture is. And I think we already have the transgender community, which has been a traditional community in India, which has existed outside the heteronormative family. It has always been there. They've had their family units outside the male-female binary. Similarly, I mean, scholars such as Ruth Vanita in their research have pointed out how, same-sex couples have existed for decades in India, and there is a lot of research on how these couples exist outside the global LGBTQ movement. As in, there are places across India where you will find same-sex couples living together, and it's all well recorded. So I feel this is a very narrow, one-sided understanding of what Indian culture is at the point itself, because there are all kinds of families, and a family is not just a male-female unit. It could be any combination of people, and we have those, and they've existed in India for a really long time. And secondly, I think that irrespective of what Indian culture is or isn't, ultimately the Constitution guarantees all of us the right to autonomy and the right to choice, which is really important. And individuals have the choice to live with who they want to live. And it's ultimately really the essence of this case that we have in front of the Delhi High Court.
The central government, in its statements on 25th February, also stated that in India, a marriage is not just a union between two individuals, but a solemn institution between a biological man and a biological woman. It further argued that marriage is a social institution that bestows joint responsibility on the spouses to ensure proper psychological and mental growth of their children in the most natural way. Akshat Agarwal believes that Centre's argument is based on procreation being the center of a marriage, and that procreation is an incident of marriage, not the heart of it.
I think the basis for the Solicitor General's argument is that procreation is at the heart of any marriage. But I think that is no longer true and possibly was never true because, I mean, procreation may be an incident of marriage and you marry to protect children and to protect legality and other, to give legitimacy to children. But all marriages, as in, you don't simply marry just to procreate. And I think in India, we've constantly seen the Supreme Court say this again and again that, you don't have to procreate, and that is not the sine qua non of a marriage, right? I mean, people can marry without procreation, and especially because as in the society is changing, and marriage law has always responded to changes in society. I mean, long back we didn't have intercaste marriage, interreligious marriage. We didn't recognize divorce in Hindu law before independence. And this has constantly changed over time. And the meaning of marriage has, of course, changed, and it is bound to change because it is so intimate to people in their lives, right? Family law is possibly the most intimate law that we have amongst most laws. And therefore, it needs to respond to what people are doing right now. It needs to respond to how people are redefining their relationships. And therefore, as in the fact that there was one conception, even firstly, I don't think procreation was ever central to marriage. But even if for the sake of argument, you were to say it was, it really no longer is because even straight people are marrying and they don't necessarily want to have children anymore. So as in marriage law, family law has to respond to these changes in society.
Anjali Gopalan, a human rights activist and the director for the NAS Foundation, told the Quint that the understanding of family has changed over the years and the government needs to wake up and smell the coffee.
The understanding of how we define family is critical. Because are you saying that in today's world, where single people are bringing up families, people have gotten this so-called union between man and woman and that creating families. What happens when one partner dies? What happens when they get divorced? What happens when they're not living together? Does that mean we are completely negating the fact that single individual can bring up whoever they're bringing up is not family? The children that they're bringing up is not family? I mean, where and how are we defining family? Increasingly, for example, as a single woman, I know that I have created my own network of friends who I see as family. To me, it's not making any sense at all. There is no logic in what the government is saying, and we must look at how the idea of family has been redefined today. It is about loving, caring, creating an environment which is stable for children, and anyone can do that, right? A same-sex couple can do it. A heterosexual couple can do it, a single person can do it. See, what is important, what we must understand is we must have a strong legal system which protects the rights of people. Does that mean attitudes will change? Not always. That takes time. But the very fact that we have a strong law in place does protect people in many ways. If I look at the fact that what the reality in my culture is today, I see a lot more single people bringing up families. I see young people living with each other. Yes. I see people making the decision not to get married. I see young people getting married and deciding not to have children. So there's a range of things that are happening, and the government really needs to wake up and smell the coffee.
Now, the centre has also stated in its affidavit that same-sex marriage can't be claimed as a fundamental right under the Constitution. To substantiate, the centre quoted a paragraph from the Navtej Johar judgment, which states that, and I quote, "There can be no doubt that an individual also has a right to a union under Article 21 of the Constitution. When we say union, we do not mean the union of marriage, though marriage is a union." Karan Tripathi, the legal consultant for the Quint, stated that the reasoning provided by the government has ignored the jurisprudence of the case and conveniently chosen to overlook the issue of equality.
The reasoning provided in this reply is not only bad in law, it is undemocratic. The central government has ignored the jurisprudence established by the Supreme Court in Navtej Johar and Nalsa judgments. It has conveniently chosen to overlook the issue of equality, especially equal protection of sexual minorities as enshrined in Articles 14 and 15 of the Constitution. A fleeting mention of Article 21 is made, but nowhere is it explained as to why I will not be eligible for the fundamental right to live a dignified life if I choose to marry someone of the same sex. Secondly, the language used to justify to deny marriage equality is extremely parochial, undemocratic, and sourced from deep-rooted prejudices against the LGBTQI community. They define marriage as a union between a biological man and a biological woman for the purpose of raising a child. This is in sheer violation of the Nalsa judgment, which allows trans persons the right to self-recognize their gender, which moved the concept of gender identity away from the genitalia. It is discriminatory against those who are incapable of procreation or who choose not to. Most disturbingly, they say that marriages are unions that guarantee the mental and psychological growth of children in the most natural way. This statement stems from a deep-rooted prejudice against the sexual minorities, which portrays them as sexual predators, pedophiles, or psychologically depressed people. They don't think that a queer household can be considered as a natural household. Further, they say it's the cultural and societal heritage of India, that same sex marriages are not nationally acknowledged, that they're not part of the cultural heritage of India. In a democracy, diversity doesn't require the stamp of approval of dominant majoritarian cultural practices. Excluding queer lived experience from the country's cultural heritage is a heteronormative hegemony. It marks queer individuals as a lesser citizens because of their defiance of a patriarchal heteronormative majoritarianism. The same thing happened during the codification of Hindu personal laws. Hindu marriage and succession acts followed the template of North Indian Brahminical ideal of personal laws, completely ignoring the local practices of many tribal communities, matrilocal communities, and those opposing the Brahminical hegemony for generations. It's not heterosexual versus homosexual. It is hegemony versus democracy. It is majoritarianism versus diversity.
If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.